They said I was their lifeline, but I didn't know lifelines could be cut the second you pull someone to safety. That line still echoes in my head like a cruel joke. My name's Elena Brooks, and for 3 years, I was the one holding the entire marketing department at Bright Path Innovations together. Deadlines, crises, client meltdowns, I fixed them all. They called me the problem solver. But what I didn't realize was that I was also their scapegoat, their safety net, and their shield. It all began in a sunlit office on the 32nd floor, glass walls, sleek desks, and fake smiles. My boss, Gregory Vance, was the kind of man who'd tell you your family one moment and throw you under a bus the next. Charming in public, venomous in private. The kind of leader who lived off other people's hard work, especially mine. And then there was Mara, my so-called teammate. She was sharp-tongued and ambitious, the kind of person who clung to powerful people like ivy to stone. We'd been friends once, coffee breaks, after-hours talks, shared frustrations. But lately, I'd noticed something different in her tone, something colder, more performative. At first, I thought it was just stress. The company had been under financial pressure, layoffs rumored every week. Everyone was desperate to stay relevant. Everyone was scared. So when Gregory started assigning me extra tasks, client pitches that weren't mine, reports no one else wanted to do, I said yes. I told myself I was proving my worth, showing loyalty. That's what team players do, right? But behind closed doors, I noticed how often my work ended up under Mara's name. How the team's victories were always tied to Gregory's leadership. I was invisible, the silent engine keeping everyone's careers running. Still, I ignored the pit in my stomach. I told myself, they appreciate me in their own way. I clung to the small things, the occasional, good job, Elena, the half-hearted smile in meetings. But something was shifting. One afternoon, I walked into a conference room earlier than planned and froze. Gregory and Mara were inside, whispering urgently. My name slipped between their voices fast, like a secret they didn't want escaping. She won't know, Mara said, tapping her pen nervously. Gregory's smirk was sharp. She doesn't need to. We'll tell her it's for the team. They went silent when they saw me. Mara laughed it off, saying something about just prepping slides. But that feeling, that quiet unease, started to grow roots inside me. That night, as I stared at my reflection in the office window, I wondered what they were hiding. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe it was exhaustion. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next week, the company faced a major crisis. A client threatened to pull out a multi-million-dollar contract. Gregory called me into his office, voice trembling with fake sincerity. Elena, you're the only one I trust to fix this, he said. You're the heart of this department. I worked for 3 sleepless nights, rewriting proposals, rebuilding presentations, salvaging data. By the end of it, the client was not only satisfied but impressed. Bright Path's reputation was saved. Gregory hugged me in front of everyone, smiling wide. This, he said, is what teamwork looks like. Teamwork. When the quarterly newsletter went out the next week, the front page headline read, Gregory Vance and team save major account, company stability restored. My name wasn't mentioned once. I told myself it didn't matter. Recognition wasn't everything. But when I walked past Mara's desk and saw her grin, that smug, knowing grin, something inside me cracked. They'd used me. They always had. But that night, as I sat at my kitchen table staring at the glowing city skyline, I made myself a promise. If they were going to use me to save their jobs, then I'd use them to build something far greater. Something that would outlast them all. And for the first time, that quiet unease I'd felt for months, it wasn't fear anymore. It was clarity. It started small, like cracks in glass. Subtle enough to ignore at first, but once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. After the big victory, the office felt different. Gregory was suddenly everywhere, strutting through meetings, talking louder, taking calls with the door half open so everyone could hear his leadership. He kept calling that client when his turning point. And Mara? She followed him like a shadow, with a smile too polished to be real. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe they had done more behind the scenes. Maybe I was overreacting. But the little things started piling up. One morning, I noticed that I'd been removed from the weekly strategy emails. the ones I'd been leading for months. When I asked about it, Gregory chuckled. "Oh, must have been a mix-up," he said, not even looking up from his phone. But when the next week came, I was still left out. Then came the meetings. They used to rely on me for everything: data breakdowns, campaign insights, client behavior analysis. But suddenly, my ideas were being pre-discussed before I even walked in. I'd make a suggestion and Gregory would nod, saying, "We already talked about that in prep." Prep? With who? Every time, Mara avoided my eyes. I started staying late again, have to catch up, have to understand what was going on. And that's when I began noticing the whispers. Conversations that stopped when I walked by. Slack messages popping up between teammates that vanished as soon as I entered the chat. Once, I caught Mara in my workspace, flipping through my project files. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh, I was just checking your latest report for reference," she said, smiling too brightly. "Then why were you saving a copy?" I asked quietly. Her smile froze. "Just being thorough." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But my gut told me something was wrong. Still, I kept pushing it aside. You don't survive corporate life by being paranoid. You survive by staying useful. So that's what I did. I worked harder, smiled more, volunteered for every project. But the harder I worked, the colder they got. Gregory started praising Mara publicly. "She's really stepping up lately," he'd say in meetings, glancing my way like he was testing my reaction. I'd force a smile, pretending it didn't sting. At lunch, the team would huddle together at one table, and someone would always forget to save me a seat. I started eating alone in the break room, scrolling through old project files, my name in every document, every timestamp proof that I'd built the foundation they were now standing on. One night, as I packed up, I overheard Gregory talking to someone on speakerphone. His office door was cracked open just enough. "Yeah, I told them Elena's wrapping up soon. We'll have Mara take over presentations moving forward. Better optics." Better optics. I stood frozen. Wrapping up? No one had told me anything about that. My hands shook as I turned off my computer, the room suddenly too quiet, too heavy. The next morning, I confronted him. "Greg, is there something going on with my role?" He smiled, that same managerial smile, the kind that says nothing but sounds professional. "Of course not. We're just restructuring a bit, you know? Expanding responsibilities. Trust me, this is a good thing for everyone. Everyone but me." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept looping back to his words, her smirk, the missing emails, the whispers. I started questioning myself. Maybe I'm imagining things. Maybe I'm too emotional, too sensitive. That's what they always said, wasn't it? That I cared too much. But the next week proved me wrong. Mara gave a presentation, my presentation, to the executive board. Every chart, every phrasing, every statistic was something I'd created. When I confronted her afterward, she laughed softly. "Oh, Elena, don't take it so personally. Greg thought it'd be better if I delivered it. You're amazing at building strategy, but I'm better at selling it. It's teamwork." Teamwork. The same word Gregory had used months ago. I smiled through the ache in my chest and said nothing. But that night, I opened my personal drive and started backing up everything, every report, every presentation, every document with my digital fingerprint on it. Because somewhere deep down, my instincts were screaming now. This wasn't just favoritism. This was preparation. They were building something and using my work to do it. And though I didn't fully understand it yet, one thing was becoming clear: they were planning to cut me out of the very foundation I built for them. And for the first time in weeks, I stopped doubting my gut. Something was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be caught off guard. I'll never forget the day I realized what they'd done. It was a Thursday, one of those painfully ordinary days where the betrayal hits harder because it hides behind routine. I was at my desk, headphones in, finalizing a client report that had kept me up half the night. Gregory had called a team update meeting for the afternoon, his voice unusually chipper in the email. By now, I knew the pattern: big smiles, false praise, and then something ugly hidden between the lines. But I didn't expect this. When the presentation started, Gregory stood tall at the front of the glass-walled conference room, Mara beside him, her usual polished smirk plastered in place. The rest of the team buzzed with forced enthusiasm. Today, Gregory announced dramatically, "We're unveiling our department's new initiative, the Growth Sustainability Model." I frowned. That name, it sounded familiar. Too familiar. He clicked to the first slide, and my heart stopped. It was my project. The exact model I'd designed 6 months ago, the one I'd pitched to him, and he'd rejected, saying it was too ambitious for our current resources. Every line, every data set, every design choice was mine. Even the sample clients listed in the presentation were pulled from my private notes. The only difference? My name was gone, replaced with Gregory's and Mara's. Developed by Greg Thompson and Mara Klein, the screen read. My stomach twisted. The room began to blur, voices echoing in and out. Impressive work, Greg. Brilliant innovation, Mara. Can't wait to roll this out. I could barely hear them. My pulse thundered in my ears as I watched the two of them perform my work, the late nights, the tears, the coffee-stained notebooks, like it was theirs. Gregory even threw in one of my original taglines, word for word. I'd once spent hours crafting that line, and now it rolled off his tongue like it had been his idea all along. When the applause ended, I couldn't move. My hands trembled under the table. And then Mara caught my eye. For a split second, just one, her smirk faltered. Not guilt. Not regret. Just a flicker of fear. She knew I knew. That moment was enough to confirm everything. After the meeting, I went straight to my desk and opened the shared drive. My project folder was gone. Deleted. Not archived, wiped. But I'd learned to trust my instincts weeks ago. And my instincts told me to dig deeper. So I did. Hidden deep in another folder, under a generic name, budget overview _Q2, I found a document log. My log. Every edit, timestamp, and version I'd saved over the past months. Each one showing me as the creator, the one who'd built it all. And at the very top, a new name appeared. Gregory Thompson, owner. He hadn't just stolen my work. He'd taken ownership. I felt my throat tighten. For years, I'd given everything to that company: loyalty, sleepless nights, my ideas, my heart. And they'd use me. Not just to survive a crisis or meet a deadline. No, they'd use me to save themselves. Because a week earlier, the company had faced major layoffs. I remembered the closed-door meetings, the tense whispers, the fake optimism. Now it all made sense. They'd used my project as the miracle fix, the innovation that saved the team from being downsized. They'd sold it to the board as their brainchild. And I, the real creator, had been erased to make room for their survival. I sat there frozen. My monitor blurred as tears welled up, but I didn't cry. Not yet. My mind spun, replaying every moment I'd trusted them, every time I'd stayed late to help. Every time Gregory said, "We're in this together." The room felt smaller by the second. My chest ached, but beneath that ache, something else began to stir, something sharp and quiet. Anger. Not the explosive kind. Not the kind that makes you yell or throw things. This anger was cold, controlled, dangerous. I stood up, packed my bag, and walked out without a word. No goodbyes. No fake smiles. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the glowing city skyline, and finally let myself cry, not because they stole from me, but because I'd let them. Because I believed in loyalty, teamwork, and integrity in a world that rewarded betrayal. When the tears dried, I opened my laptop. One by one, I pulled up every backup I'd made. Every timestamp, every version history, every confidential email Gregory had forgotten to delete. Proof that I had built the foundation they were standing on. Then I opened a new document. At the top, I wrote 4 words in bold letters. My empire starts here. I didn't know how yet. But I knew this: I wasn't going to destroy them with anger. I was going to outthink them. Outplay them. Outbuild them. They used me to save their jobs. But soon, they'd realize I'd used them to find my purpose. And when I was done, I wouldn't just have justice. I'd have an empire. The weekend after the betrayal was a blur. I barely ate, barely slept. I sat in silence, surrounded by empty coffee cups and my laptop, my only ally in a war I hadn't chosen, but could no longer ignore. The city outside my window moved on like nothing had happened, cars honking, people laughing, lights flickering in high-rises. Meanwhile, my world felt like it had caved in. I had spent years believing that hard work spoke for itself, that loyalty mattered, that if you gave enough time, effort, kindness, people would value you. But I was wrong. What I learned that Thursday shattered every illusion I'd built my career on. People don't protect you. They protect what you can do for them. And the second you stop serving their interests, you're disposable. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, Gregory's smug smile, Mara's false charm, the applause. Each memory burned hotter until it didn't hurt anymore. It just fueled me. By Sunday night, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. I realized no one was coming to fix this. No apology, no justice, no miracle email from the CEO saying, "We know what really happened." If I wanted to reclaim what was mine, my work, my name, my worth, I had to build it myself. And this time, I wasn't going to play nice. Monday morning, I showed up to the office early. Earlier than anyone else. The air was still. The fluorescent lights flickered to life as I walked through the empty cubicles, the same space where I'd once poured my heart into projects that others took credit for. But something about it felt different now. It wasn't their office anymore. Not in my head. I sat down, opened my laptop, and started outlining my next move. Not a tantrum. Not revenge. A plan. I began documenting everything, every version history from the stolen project, every internal chat message with timestamps, every meeting summary where I'd shared the initial idea, and most importantly, the proposal I'd originally written. The one with my name, my handwriting, and my digital signature. The more I compiled, the lighter I felt. Like each file I saved was a brick, and I was finally building something that belonged to me. But then I paused. Was my end goal to destroy Gregory and Mara? Or was it to free myself from the box they'd put me in? That question changed everything. Because if I just wanted revenge, I'd be fighting their kind of battle, a dirty, petty one. But if I wanted to win, truly win, I had to think bigger. So I did something unexpected. I emailed HR. Not to report them, but to request my resignation. Just like that. No warning. No confrontation. I could almost hear the confusion when Gregory read it, probably in his corner office, sipping his overpriced coffee, assuming I'd crawl back after a few days of hurt. But he didn't know me anymore. When I left that building for the last time, I didn't look back. It wasn't just an exit, it was an awakening. I took the severance, my skills, my files, and every ounce of knowledge I'd gained under their exploitation and started working for myself. Day by day, I rebuilt what they'd broken. Late nights, strong coffee, and endless lines of strategy, this time, not for their company, but for my own. And I started small. A one-woman consulting firm from my apartment. No investors. No false smiles. Just me, my laptop, and my determination. The irony? The very system I'd created, the one Gregory and Mara had stolen, became the foundation of my first client project. But this time, my name was on every document, every invoice, every credit line. I didn't need to prove myself to them anymore. I was proving it to me. One night, around 2 a.m., I caught my reflection in the dark screen after sending off a proposal to a potential client. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked calm, confident, powerful. That's when I realized something profound. They hadn't broken me. They'd built me. Because without their betrayal, I might have stayed small, forever helping others rise while I remained invisible. But now, I was done being invisible. They used me to save their jobs. But what they didn't realize was that, in doing so, they'd taught me how the game was played. And I was about to play it better than any of them ever could. I closed my laptop, whispered to the quiet room, "You wanted to use me? Congratulations. You just created your biggest competition." The fear was gone. The doubt was gone. All that remained was fire, calm, focused, unstoppable fire. And from that moment on, I knew this wasn't a story of revenge anymore. It was the beginning of my empire. They still thought I was fragile. That was the first advantage I engineered. For weeks after I left, I fed the world the version of myself they expected. A quiet resignation letter, a tasteful, taking time to reflect, post on LinkedIn, the occasional low-energy reply to a recruiter. Let them think I'd folded. Let them feel safe. Confidence hides better in silence than in noise. But inside my quiet, something else was humming, a patient, methodical hum. I built plans the way I used to build campaigns, with data first, then narrative. Revenge, I decided, would not be theatrical. It would be inevitable. Step 1. Consolidate the truth. I cataloged everything in 3 places: encrypted cloud storage, a legal friend's vault, and a physical binder hidden at my mentor's office. The binder felt deliciously old-fashioned, printed slides with timestamps, version histories exported from shared drives, copies of emails with headers intact. I documented meeting notes with dates, names, and quotes. I didn't rely on memory. I relied on forensic breadcrumbs. Every file was labeled, hashed, and cross-referenced. Proof is patient and, when organized, brutal. Step 2. Recruit silently. You don't need a mob. You need witnesses who can't be dismissed. Jenna, who used to scrub data for the team, met me for coffee under the pretense of career advice. She cried at first relief, guilt, a tiny trader's release. Then she handed over screenshots she'd saved because something felt off. Malik from IT dropped me a thumb drive and a book I returned to him for safekeeping. He'd been quietly monitoring odd permission elevations and had the logs to show it. Even a mid-level account manager, Sam, confessed he'd heard Gregory promising investors a miracle that only existed in my drafts. Each of them gave me something small and crucial. Together, they formed a lattice of corroboration. Step 3. Craft the persona. I practiced sorrow in public. At networking events, I smiled politely, used the safe phrases, and answered questions with the measured candor of someone rebuilding. I let stories about my humbling exit circulate because they made Gregory relax and Mara overplay. Narcissists always perform bigger when they believe the stage is clear. Step 4. Lay bait in plain sight. I created a dummy consultancy profile, modest, unbranded, framed as a freelance strategist with selective clients. Through that channel, I reached out to a handful of the very clients who'd once been fed my proposals under Gregory's name. I offered a discreet audit, no-cost, high-level review, pitched as competitive research. It was framed as generosity from a former industry consultant. Some passed. One answered, a regional client who'd always had a soft spot for the kind of strategic depth I favored. They invited me to review a recent pitch that Moran, Gregory's middleman, had presented. When I walked into that client meeting as a quiet consultant, I did it with a calm that surprised even me. The presentation on the table was, unsurprisingly, a version of my growth sustainability model. I listened, made 2 small clarifying comments, and kept my face neutral. Then, at the end, I asked to see the proposal source files for a transparency check. The account manager handed them over, not realizing what I'd done. I had the original drafts on my encrypted device, and the client's copy, with the dates, sat beside it. 2 clicks, and the fingerprints lined up. Ownership was visible in black and white. The client's eyebrows rose. They asked questions. It was subtle, but the seed was planted. Step 5. Trigger natural instincts. People betray themselves when they panic. I nudged panic. I leaked nothing, instead I enabled curiosity. A casual conversation with a board advisor here, a question to an investor there, do we have clear attribution for this work? Harmless on its face. But those questions travel. Gregory, who thrived on performance, began to present more aggressively, more loudly. Mara began polishing her public persona with quotes about leadership in crisis. Hubris is a record keeper's blessing. Step 6. Build the legal scaffolding. I wasn't a vigilante. I was a strategist who respected law. My lawyer prepared a neutral packet, a factual, non-accusatory dossier that laid out authorship evidence, timelines, and potential contract implications for misattribution. It wasn't meant to be sent immediately. It was meant to be delivered when the stakes were highest, when the board, investors, or a client demanded clarity. Everything hinged on timing. The company had a major investor showcase scheduled in 3 weeks, the perfect light. If I revealed the right proof at the right moment, it wouldn't feel like an attack. It would feel like due diligence built into the corporate life cycle. They'd have to act. In the meantime, I grew my consultancy quietly. My first client converted into a retainer. Another came through a referral once a quietly furious account manager told a friend, "There's someone who actually built the system we're selling." Word spreads when relief and competence show up in client results. My bank account grew. My confidence grew. My public persona stayed small and unthreatening, which made Greg bolder and more careless. The most delicate part of the plan was emotional. I had to keep my own rage controlled. Revenge born of fury is sloppy. So when Mara posted a triumphant team selfie celebrating a new internal award, one that used my line and my slide, I commented with a simple, earnest "Congrats, team." No caps lock. No venom. They cheered. They told themselves I was harmless. Perfect. One evening, Malik texted a single line, "Logs backed up. Ready when you are." My chest tightened, not with adrenaline, but with a cool, clean certainty. The dossier was complete. The witnesses were ready. The clients were primed for clarity. They still thought I was rebuilding a life quietly. They didn't see the ledger I'd been stitching. I slipped the final file into the lawyer's vault and scheduled a lunch with an investor contact under the guise of sharing industry insights. He was curious, analytic, and impatient, exactly the type who asks the questions that make boards uncomfortable. At that lunch I mentioned, almost as an aside, a technicality, how often a company audits authorship before taking a product public. He listened. He asked for examples. I smiled and said, "Sometimes the truth is right there in the metadata." He asked for an example. I promised to send one when the time was right. As I walked home that night, the city lights felt different, sharper, more mine. The plan wasn't revenge in the old, cinematic sense. It was architecture, cold, precise, and inevitable. Gregory still thought I was fragile. Mara still posted motivational captions. They believed the story they'd written about me. Let them hold on to that illusion. In 3 weeks, when the boardroom fills and their names are on the stage, the world will ask for proof. I had been building that proof while they were building their narrative. And proof, once opened, can't be smiled away. The storm was scheduled. The calm before it was deliberate. The boardroom that morning felt like the inside of a camera lens, everyone crowded into a frame they'd already rehearsed. Investors on 3 sides, lawyers with thin notepads, PR clutching their phones like talismans. Gregory arrived wearing the same confident smile he wore when he'd presented my work as his. Mara floated in just behind him, polished, practiced, the picture of triumphant ease. They expected applause. They expected the predictable arc, praise, promotion, investor pats on the back. I walked in quiet, clutching nothing but a slim folder and my phone. Jenna sat beside me, composed. Malik was at the far corner, a ghost in the IT chair with a USB tucked away in his sleeve. The mentor who'd nudged a skeptical board member sat 2 seats away, neutral as a judge. The air smelled faintly of coffee and 1,000 small lies. Gregory opened with bravado. He spoke of market capture, of scalability unlocked, of how our department had pivoted and saved the company. The slides behind him flashed with polished charts and the language he'd stolen. Cameras in the room shifted like curious birds. He smiled at the investors. They smiled back, dollar signs in polite eyes. When he finished, the CEO called for questions. Investors asked predictable ones about rollout timelines and KPIs. That's when I stood. There's power in not performing. Power in being the one who walks into a room everyone is watching and refuses to carry the theatrics. I kept my voice steady, almost soft. Before we go further, I said, "May I demonstrate attribution transparency?" I brought materials that clarify authorship and development history for the growth sustainability model. A murmur moved across the room. Gregory's smile thinned. Mara's hand tightened around the edge of her chair. I placed the folder on the table and opened it. The binder was clinical, exported metadata, version histories, email headers, timestamped drafts, printouts of Slack threads. I slid a copy across to the CEO, another to legal, and a third to the lead investor. Malik, at my cue, tapped the laptop. A clean audit interface filled the screen. My microservice trace log file hashes matched to my account, commit histories listing my user ID, and timestamps that predated the official launch. I did not accuse. I narrated. I let the paper and pixels speak. These are the original drafts, I said. Authorship metadata shows creation dates, contributors, and version history. Here's the snapshot of the repository before the transition, my commits, my notes. Here's a backup from my mentor's office with certified timestamps. And here is correspondence where Gregory explicitly approved the proposal I had authored months earlier. The room listened because the room couldn't do anything else. Facts are loud in rooms built for scripts. Gregory sputtered the first protest, practiced indignation. This is selective editing, he snapped. Mara chimed in with the "we collaborated" chorus. But the audit interface was mercilessly obedient. Malik toggled through server logs like a surgeon revealing incision points, midnight admin access, metadata edits, attempted scrubs. Every attempt to rewrite the record had left traces, the sloppy arrogance of men who thought they could clean history with a white glove. An investor leaned forward. "Can we verify chain of custody externally?" he asked, voice low. "Yes," I replied. "Legal copies are already with counsel. My lawyer will provide notarized export. Independent auditors are on standby." I watched their faces change from irritation to concern. When money's at risk, curiosity becomes obligation. The CEO called for legal. Phones went quiet. PR whispered into earpieces. Leaders who once smiled at Gregory now exchanged glances that tasted like strategy. In the silence that followed, the lead investor, a pragmatic woman who'd made and lost fortunes on hard data, asked a question no prepared speech could answer. How did this pass initial review? Who signed the attribution? Gregory's throat worked. He tried to weave the narrative he'd always woven of team effort and visionary leadership. But every time he opened his mouth, a new file appeared on the screen, project drafts with my drafts embedded, a time-stamped message where he asked me to finalize for board review, and a client email referencing details only my original notebook contained. The ledger was a slow, surgical knife. The legal team announced they were initiating a forensic audit. Investors requested emergency calls with their boards. A client liaison who had been quietly on the call rose, color draining from his face. "We relied on this project," he said. "If attribution is misrepresented, we need clarity for contract and invoicing." Contracts clicked open on tablets. Language shifted from praise to protection. Within hours, consequences rippled outward. An internal probe was launched. Gregory was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Mara's pending promotion was frozen. One of the biggest clients suspended the rollout pending verification of intellectual property. The PR team issued a carefully neutral statement about internal review. On the trading monitor in the lobby, financial analysts had already started annotating risk exposure. None of this felt like spectacle to me. I watched like someone observing the mechanics of a clock, not its face. The humiliation on Gregory's face wasn't satisfying. It was quiet, bureaucratic, ultimately more painful than any public shame. The board's actions were procedural, immutable. My revenge was procedural too, documented, undeniable, polite. A junior associate who'd once smiled at my expense stopped by my chair and whispered, "I'm so sorry." She looked genuinely small. That's when I felt the shape of what I'd done, not ruin for ruin's sake, but correction. I'd used the same currency they'd valued, work, credibility, measurable impact, and turned it into accountability. When the meeting adjourned, cameras snapping, PR composing empty platitudes, I stepped into the corridor and breathed. The city's late winter air hit my face like cold truth. Reporters clustered outside the building, phones already alive. My phone chimed, messages from Jenna, Malik, my mentor. "You did it. We have copies. They can't sweep this under now." I didn't clap or celebrate. I told myself the work wasn't done. Consequences would take days, weeks, legal counsels, and board votes. But in that moment, I felt the most delicate thing, calm. Not the brittle calm of someone who's numb, but the steady calm of someone who had translated betrayal into architecture and had let the architecture do the speaking. They came to me for salvation for their careers. I gave them a proof of concept for accountability. The machines of finance and governance moved slowly, inexorably, toward balance. And as the doors closed behind me, I walked out of the building with the same quiet that had once been my vulnerability, now sharpened into purpose. Their applause was gone. My name, finally, was back in the ledger. When the storm finally settled, the silence that followed was almost sacred. It had been 3 months since the board meeting, 3 months since I walked out of that glass building with my reputation intact and their empires crumbling behind me. Gregory was officially terminated after the internal audit confirmed everything: document forgery, project misattribution, unethical conduct. Mara resigned quietly 2 weeks later, trying to salvage what was left of her image. Neither of them looked at me again. But that's the funny thing about truth, it doesn't need to shout. It just waits, patiently, until the noise dies down. The day the news broke publicly, my inbox overflowed, journalists requesting statements, ex-colleagues offering apologies, recruiters dangling positions I once dreamed of. But I didn't reply. I wasn't interested in rebuilding inside a system that had already shown me how easily it could be corrupted. I had a better idea, one I'd been quietly shaping during those sleepless nights of betrayal. You see, when people use you, they reveal their dependencies. When they exploit you, they teach you where the leverage is. Gregory and Mara didn't just teach me how the corporate world works, they gave me the blueprint to outgrow it. So, while their reputations sank beneath lawsuits and lost contracts, I registered a new company, Lyra Systems. It started with just me, Malik, and Jenna in a shared workspace with flickering lights and secondhand furniture. But it had something the old company didn't: ethics, transparency, a soul. We weren't chasing investors, they chased us. Within weeks, word spread about the team that exposed corruption and still built the most efficient, sustainable growth model in the sector. Clients who had once ignored my emails now begged for partnership meetings. We weren't a business built on exploitation anymore, we were a movement born from it. And every milestone was a reminder: I didn't just survive them, I surpassed them. But I'll be honest, victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like stillness. Like the quiet satisfaction of finally sleeping through the night without replaying the betrayal over and over. Like knowing I could walk into any room and not need to shrink, not need to apologize for being too kind, too emotional, or too human. That's the thing about people like me, they think kindness is weakness until it outlasts them. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across the office floor, Jenna handed me a tablet. "You should see this," she said, half smiling. It was a press release. Gregory's new consulting firm had folded, blacklisted for ethics violations. Mara had posted a cryptic motivational quote on LinkedIn about second chances. I didn't feel joy. Just a quiet recognition, poetic justice, arriving right on schedule. I leaned back, smiled faintly, and closed the screen. Let's get back to work, I told her. Because revenge wasn't the goal anymore. The goal was evolution. Now, when I speak at conferences, I tell young professionals something simple. Never let someone convince you that your humanity is a liability. It's your compass. It's your code. The world might undervalue it for a while, but it's the one thing that makes you irreplaceable. That betrayal, it didn't break me. It recalibrated me. It forced me to see my worth not through someone else's validation, but through the impact I could create when I finally stopped asking for permission. And in the strangest way, I owe them gratitude. They thought they were using me to save their jobs. But what they really did was teach me how to build an empire that could never be taken from me. They tried to bury me in their lies, but I was the architect of the ground they stood on. Have you ever been used by someone you trusted, only to realize that their betrayal was the very spark that made you stronger? Tell me your story in the comments. Let's talk about it. Because pain has a strange way of becoming purpose when you decide you're done playing small. If this story hit you deep, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reconstruction of your strength, your peace, and your worth. And trust me, nothing is more powerful than a woman who remembers who she is.